Good afternoon in Europe and Middle East, and good morning in the US East Coast. Welcome to the Med Dialogue, part of a series on the path to the 7th Mediterranean Conference. ISPI and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs will organize in Rome from the 2nd and the 4th of next December. Med Dialogue is now the most important event devoted to our common great sea, as David Abulafia would call it. Many of you did notice I'm not Paolo Magri, the executive vice president of ISPI, who was supposed to coordinate this meeting. Unfortunately, Paolo fell victim of a return of normality after the long pandemic, an airline strike. As a fact of the matter, I'm Ugo Tramballi, senior advisor of ISPI and columnist with Il Sole 24 Ore, which is the Italian equivalent of Financial Times. Today, I have the honor and the burden to replace Paolo, introducing and moderating our dialogue with Ambassador Tor Wennesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you.
In this assignment, I'll have the essential help of two great experts, Randa Slim of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., despite she's not at the moment in D.C., but anyway, she's in the United States. And Zaid Yadat, director of the Center for Strategic Studies of Jordan in Amman. Prior to his current role at the United Nations, Ambassador Wennesland was appointed special representative to the Middle East peace process for Norway and served as a diplomat in several Middle East countries. His great experience will be relevant to our attempt to find a light at the end of the tunnel called the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Allow me to add, anyway, that we always have to show respect and gratitude for the Norwegian diplomacy that started and realized the essential part of the Oslo Accords. Ambassador Wennesland is part of the same professional and imaginative milieu of Terry Larsen, his wife Mona Yule, and the late Johan Horst. Randa, Zaid, and myself will ask some questions to Tor Wennesland, and then we'll give the floor to the questions of the public connected online with us. Ambassador, let me start with my first question. In this first part of the year, we have seen several events. Again, no Palestinian election. Again, Israeli elections, too many. There are never too many elections, but in this case, perhaps for Israel, the case of Israel is too many. Demonstrations and violence in Jerusalem, another Israeli attempt to change the demography of East Jerusalem, another war in Gaza, apparently the end of the Netanyahu era, a new far right, center, left, far left Israeli government. Is this enough to hope on how could I say, on a modicum new momentum in the so-called peace process, Ambassador?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. Highly appreciated from my side, and it gives me an opportunity to be in dialogue with world-renowned experts and the audience, and something I appreciate. To the question. Well, it is extraordinary, difficult situation here now. We need to deal with the short term in order to get to the medium term and long term. And the short term is with us. We have a very fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and I cannot really tell you whether that would hold long term or not. This is something I work with the parties and key partners in the region and internationally to see if we can improve a situation whereby a ceasefire will stick. Secondly, we have a situation that is very rare at the West Bank, whereby there are serious political demonstrations against the PA that has been building up over time and caused by several events. And the PA also is in a very difficult financial situation. Well, so if that is not enough, we have seen over the months from Ramadan an uptick in flashpoint situations in and around Jerusalem and at the West Bank, and the project of settlement building, demolitions and evictions is continuing as we speak. So here is, in a way, the challenge we have. I mean, if we cannot deal with the drivers of the conflicts, the key structural drivers, which is that we haven't been able to address the core issues of the relationship between the Israelis and Palestinians good enough. Neither have we been able to deal with the situation in and around Gaza, in particular, where there is a closure and serious lack of movement there and access. We have a situation where the main parties do have their attention in a different direction from starting up to deal with a serious final status issues. So there is a lot of other stuff to attend to. So again, I'm saying that we are maneuvering and trying to navigate this situation now in order to avoid an uptick in the conflict and a stabilization of the situation on ground. And if we manage that, I hope we can get into more shallow water, so it is possible to do more on the more long-term political issues that we should have been able to resolve a long time ago. But just now, there is no quick fix, and that's the situation.
Thank you. Randa, it's your turn.
Thank you, Ugo. Good day, everyone. And it's really a pleasure to be with you, Ambassador Wennesland, and to be with my co-panelists, Ugo Trambali and Zaid Ayadal. My question builds on what you just said, Ambassador, which is there have been, I mean, we know all these short-term challenges, that are presenting obstacles to moving onto the core issues driving this conflict and have been driving this conflict for decades. So the question is, as you are dealing with the short-term challenges, you are thinking long-term. And in terms of long-term, a lot of analysts have written about the failure of the previous negotiation paradigm. And given, as you said, there is a new situation, there are new dynamics in the region and in the conflict theater, what are you thinking of a new negotiation paradigm to move forward with and for addressing the conflict, and what are the parameters of this new negotiation paradigm?
Well, I didn't say that I was thinking about a new paradigm for negotiations, Randa. I'm very cautious by announcing that kind of ambition. I'm only saying to you that the parameters we need to address are well known, but they have a reality on the ground as we speak. One of the realities is, for example, connected to the settlement situation. That's a final status issue, very clearly. So we have a security situation in and around Gaza and an uptick of security problems at the West Bank. That's a part of the final status issues. We have an unclear situation in Jerusalem. Or a new situation in Jerusalem. That's also a part of the final status agreements. So many of the conflictual elements we are seeing now is directly linked. to the final status issues. Well, then there is a question of how we roll them back. And what is the time horizon for that? Well, then we need to start having those serious discussions with the parties. And as I said to you, there is a brand new Israeli government with a construction we really haven't seen before. Personally, I've not had a chance to reach out and start a discussion on that goes beyond the short term. I've had that with the Palestinians for years, and their position is well known, but their focus of attention is now in a different place. I know this may be boring to talk about the short term, but when you are here and you're in the midst of it as a diplomat on ground, you somehow need to attend to it. You need to try to off-ramp conflicts where people are dying in high numbers. You need to get a degree of humanitarian attention. You need to address situations that are occurring around us more or less on a daily basis. And we do that. So if you ask me, have I thought about the long term? Yeah, I have. I've actually looked at different ways on addressing a possible endgame. I have been working on this for some years in different capacity and with different groups of people from both sides. So yes, I'm actually a believer, and that's why I have the job, in the possibility of moving these agendas forward. The ambitions that was based and is based on the Oslo agreements and the UN resolutions will need to be addressed, while at the same time the situation on ground is highly different from what it was when these parameters were established. So we will need to have a cross look on these realities. But let me mention one thing that is outside the parameters that has changed the situation completely on ground. I mean, we did not, when we worked with Oslo, and I did that at a fairly early stage, we did not envisage a split in the Palestinian political situation like we have had now cemented for 15 years. That was not on the agenda. It was never a focus. And the whole issue of the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people in a situation where we probably today, if election, would have had a majority of seats for Hamas in the parliament without having Hamas inside the PLO. These are issues that was never kind of seriously foreseen, and we now have to deal with, and it defines some of the context we are dealing with. So we have the old issues and a whole lot of new ones that we need to deal with in parallel, and this makes the challenge slightly different from the discussions I was a part of myself just in the aftermath of Oslo II, where we thought we should lock the whole thing down in a period of 5 years.
Thank you. Zaid, further. Microphone, mic.
Thank you. It's a delight and an honor to be with you this afternoon. And Your Excellency, the Ambassador, I'm delighted that you're a big believer, so keep the faith, because people in the region has lost it for too long now. This started 1993 at least, and then gradually people have lost their faith in the whole peace process. And I'll tell you some of the talk and discourses that are dominating the streets here. There is no peace, there is a process, there is no conflict resolutions, there conflict management. Of course, I understand the situations, the new issues and the old ones, the fragility of the ceasefire and the challenges facing the PA and the financial constraints, and the various different priorities and of the parties to the conflict. But to the people mind, this conflict is very close to home here in Amman, in Jordan, and people feel the heat every single day of what's happening there. And certainly they have their own narratives and perspectives of the obstacles, about the problems, about the main drivers and the outcomes of this. And mainly they saying it's all intended to be so. Even the division, if you wish, of the Palestinians' leadership and the lack of its efficiency. Well, I'm well aware of the shortcomings of the PLO, but don't you think, to start with, that the Israelis' policies since 1993 up till today was to far extent responsible for not having or reaching out or even creating an equal partner, a peace partner, to negotiate the final status that was supposed to start back in 1990. So what I'm saying, these new issues that we have to deal with are intended outcomes of the way we manage the conflict. And then when I say we, I'm referring to the international community represented in the UN and also other international and regional players. So all of that, how on earth would a Palestinian or a Jordanian or an Arab living in the region would envision a possibility of depackling these new issues of the old issues and still have a hope that the UN is doing their job and the Palestinians will have their rights? And to them, it's a very simple issue. It's the occupation that we have agreed that it's illegal and it has to be stopped and finished. So how would you react to these perspectives and narratives and discourses in the region?
I thank you. I think if I had been a Palestinian and having been living here for some 50 years and looked at the political scene as it is here now, I would have said the same. Well, it is for me to have a different perspective. And let me say one thing very clearly. When it comes to management of conflict is better than not managing them. Because if you are in the wrong end of a conflict that is not managed, then people suffer. So that's number one. And it's my job as a UN special coordinator to deal with that sort of situation. But when it comes to the hopes and expectations of people that have rights and they've had ambitions and they've been listening to politicians about their vision and their narratives, and then nothing is moving forward, for sure. I understand that. I think we have been using concepts like peace process and end of conflict very optimistically. That is partly to be blamed on politicians and partly on diplomats. Because when people are not seeing any of these things happening, for sure, I can understand their frustration and often rage, actually, I do. But then, how to get from that frustration into a process where you have a dynamic? How do you get the parties to start talking in a meaningful way? Well, I can tell you there has not been too much room for that within the political scene we have had on the two sides and between the two sides, at least over the last almost 7 to 8 years. So Not even the basics we have been able to address. And here the international community has tried to do whatever was possible to do, but there has not been a capacity to set up a serious set of talks whereby the parties could move these agendas forward. If the parties are not willing to do so, we cannot force them to do so. But there was another part of your question as well, and that is, who is to blame for the whole thing? Well, I would say it like this, that this conflict has roots that goes back to 48. It has elements in it that goes back to 67 and 73. There has been new developments after 73, and there has been a whole range of conflicts in and around Gaza since 2005. All these elements have, in a way, played into our inability to move the main agendas forward. So what do we say to the people that are frustrated and worried? We say, A, we understand you. B, we are trying to deal with it. And C, we are trying to deal with it in an honest way. I do that straight away. But then it is also for the politicians to deal with that. The system we have in place now is grossly different from what we thought would be possible to establish, even as a compromise, because Oslo is a compromise term. So we are way outside that. Can we walk it back, and how fast can we do it? I don't really know. The only thing I can say is that this is what we are working on from my side, the UN. I work with my partners in the Quartet, and I'm very happy to see the Americans back with recognizable positions. That's very helpful. We have a proactive EU and Russia in the Quartet, and we have broad support in the region among key regional partners to move the agenda forward. But mind you, no politicians, no foreign ministers, and not the international community has actually been capable of resetting these talks. That's where we are today, and that's what politics about these things, that's what politics is about. We haven't managed.
Thank you. But Ambassador, is the Palestinian cause still relevant? I mean, in these last 10 years, we saw Arab Springs, Arab civil wars, international war in some places, millions of refugees, and then we saw how is the name? Maybe it's a Freudian. I don't remember. I never remember the name of Abraham Accords, where we have seen relevant, an important number of important Arab countries, together with Saudi Arabia, which is not part exactly of the process, but is a promoter of the process, making agreement, recognizing Israel without the conditionality of a Palestinian state. So a lot of things are changed. So are you working for, in long term, for the two-state format, the two-state solution, or a one-state solution?
Okay. I've been living through this period of changes in the Middle East on close call, so to say. The Arab Spring, the normalization agreements, what has been in between, and all this. I just take note of one thing. There is no alternative defined, neither on the Palestinian side, among Palestinian politicians, or on the Israeli side, that goes for a one-state solution. That's a fact. So I take note of that fact, and I take it that this is the way we are going to move forward. Relatively speaking, how important is the Palestinian issue today compared to what it was 25 years ago? and what it was just after the Mecca Agreement with reconciliation in Palestine, and a unity government that lasted for 100 days, the spring of 2007. How relevant is this issue today? Well, I mean, there are other competing dynamics, as you rightly pointed to, that has emerged Europe into political changes and different focus. For example, the refugee crisis that emanates out of conflicts in this region. There are other issues as well in between member of the Arab family that is more recent and take a lot of attention. But I will say that sitting on close hold, as I do where I am, some 1.5 kilometers away from the old city, and seeing the flare-up of the conflict in and around Al-Aqsa at the time of Ramadan, and the rippling effect it had internationally and in the Arab world, it is very difficult for me to say that what is happening on ground where I live in Sheikh Jarrah, is not affecting the situation internationally, because it is. This is a very explosive place with a very explosive potential and with a character that may be quite unsettling, not only for the regional situation if we allow it to flare up. So it's relevant, very, very relevant.
Thank you, Randa.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ugo. All right, I hear you, Ambassador. The conflict trajectory is stuck now in where it is, in its negativity. And politics is the art of the possible. So within these parameters, you know, which constrain what you and your office can do, what's going to take, at least in the short term, from regionals, international players to unstuck this negative conflict trajectory we are in? What's going to take to change the parties in the conflict's calculi? Because right now, as I'm hearing you, they seem to be okay with the status quo. I mean, I'm talking about the political leadership on all sides of the conflict. And so what's going to take from, again, the regionals and the international parties, and using what instruments, including legal, international law, you know, to start injecting momentum and, you know, get this unstuck. Otherwise, we will be unstuck in it for the next 10, 20 years.
This is a very good question, and this I need to be able to answer actually. And my suggestion as a possible way to what you're asking me. So basically, I want to interpret this as a question as to what would I like to do over the next half year. Okay.
Perfect.
So number one, I will do whatever I can to avoid an uptick or a repetition of the war in Gaza. Because that has such a rippling and distracting effect that if it happens again, we will be way too short-term, way too humanitarian, and way too little political. So that's number one. Number two, you need to address some of the structural elements, both to the conflict in Gaza and the situation at the West Bank. So what is that? You cannot have 2 million people, or 2.1 as it is now, with half of the population around 15 years or younger, living in a small area like Gaza, locked. If we cannot fix Gaza by pouring money into Gaza, we can fix Gaza if we start to opening it up. That requires a political decision. And if that political decision is not coming, we will be in a repetitious cycle of upticks and violence, and the situation for the people inside will be more and more desperate. Number 3, we need to address the situation at the West Bank differently from what we have been doing. That requires also political will and initiative. First of all, the flashpoints we have in and around Jerusalem needs to be addressed and calmed down, number 1. Number 2, we cannot continue with house demolitions and evictions based on legal decisions that are grossly in favor of Israelis in courts. That doesn't work, and it's destabilizing on a daily basis. When I'm in the Security Council reporting on events, a huge number of these events is directly related to the issues I said now. So we need to do something with that. Number 4, I get back to the PA situation, but in order to address the situation as it is on the West Bank, the West Bank economy and the Gazan economy cannot be fully realized if they cannot use the land. A huge part of the land at the West Bank is not for productive use for the Palestinians. So again, we are back to the old situation. So all these elements are there. And finally, the Palestinians need to have a relook on their split, because that split is completely damaging when it comes to the PA's ability to strategize and move up a plan for moving their own project forward, at least to underpin and strengthen the institutions of a state, to strengthen the political legitimacy that has been severely weakened after they canceled the elections, and to have accountability and transparency in their economic handling. So short term, I would mean that we need to move these elements in parallel. We cannot address them one by one and on a timeline after each other. If we don't move this forward comprehensively and fast, we will not be able to stabilize the situation. But I would think that there should be possible to be able to have progress on these fronts, provided there is a willingness to address the political sides of what I'm talking about. So when I say we need to stabilize the situation short term, that is not pouring money, it's not humanitarian, but it is the international community getting in behind such a way of thinking. And actually that happened yesterday, because we have the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee that is not ad hoc anymore. It has lasted for 25 years. It's a part of the Oslo package. They met yesterday, and there is actually among the donor community and with the parties present, there is a fairly broad consensus on moving forward along these lines, with a little bit of division here and a little bit of adjustment there. What I said to you now, these points, is actually where I think the focus will be in a period that will take us up to October, November. If we can get past that one, we are into a different territory where we can start addressing more of the structural issues. And all of that, all these issues will be related to what is enhanced and enshrined in the final status parameters. But we need to get out and around the corner now, but in a comprehensive way. It is not about pouring money into Gaza. That's important. It is not to be too short term, but it's to be comprehensive, because otherwise we are not in line with the ambitions we should have if the objective is to get going on the serious issue of establishing two states living side.
Thank you again. Well, this is very interesting, Your Excellency the Ambassador, and this is thorough, the short-term plans and steps that you're thinking of doing or what you like to do. and good to hear the good news about the Ad Hoc Committee. I would like to take you back to more than a short term, because the short term we use in it in order to go back on track if it's rightly seen. Let me start by talking about two important issues: the relevance, and how relevant is the Palestinian issue to the politics in the region. And I think that there was some rushed conclusion that because of what had happened in 2010 and 11, the Arab Spring, has actually backslided the Palestinian issue in the minds and the priorities of the public opinions in their countries. Probably correct for a very short while. But our polling and surveys saying that the Palestinian issue is still alive and strong and front runner for mostly all Arab countries. If you ask Jordanians what is the most pressing issue in the region, it's always the Palestinian issue. And same for Egyptians, same for other Arab countries. So now I'm saying it's as a priority probably as it used to be, comparing to other conflicts in the region, Syrians, Iraqi, Yemeni, Libyan, but it is not a dead issue. It's not something that the Arabs, the Arab nations are not concerned about. And that's why they're interacting and reacting to what is happening in Jerusalem. That's in the way you see it. So it's very important to keep it in mind, because I think on part of the Israelis' policymakers, this was an assumption that is no longer important and we can do whatever we want. And I can see that reflected in the American plan for the deal of the century process that was rejected by Palestinians and others. Now, even the Abrahamic Accord that Yogo has pointed to, I think it happened despite the Palestinian issue, not because of the non-relevance of the Palestinian issue, for certain calculations and different mindsets. But back to the linking these short terms of stabilizing the situation right now, giving all this relevancy of the issue to the people and to the politics and security and stability and prosperity to the region, with a short, with medium and long term. That's back to what you've said, two-state solutions, two states living side by side. To the many, the two-state solution is that there is no way of a two-state solution unless we're going to create something and call it a state for the Palestinians. But it's not a state in the political term that we used to know, or we know. Now, I can create a neighborhood and call it state, but this is not a two-state solution. And therefore, even Palestinians, intellectuals and politicians are advocating a right-based approach for Palestinians as an alternative to the two-state solutions. Of course, as a Jordanian, I certainly would love to see a two-state solutions alive and achievable. But this is the reality. So what are your reactions to that, your ambassador?
First of all, I mean, in my analysis, there is no difference between a two-state solution and a right-based solution. And it has been very clearly illustrated in the developments that has taken place on ground Palestine and in Jerusalem. And also, if you have a more kind of serious look on the situation on the Israeli side, it is very important to reset equal rights for all people living on a territory, and for people living under occupation to have the rights as enshrined and defined in international law. So I don't see them as kind of different, but I see them as a parallel option. And I think it is very important to stick to that. Well, we cannot have an undemocratic two-state solution. We need to have two democracies living side by side. So, and there is a way to go. Today, with the present situation where there is no two states, today, when we look at the situation domestically, where I live, there is a way to go. I must say that I want to reiterate that it is actually the two-state solution that enjoys the broadest support on both sides. It's a fact. It has been a fact over time. The fact that people are being desperate that we cannot get to there hasn't changed that paradigm as the basic paradigm in Israel and in Palestine. And I want to add one kind of piece of warning when we are sitting looking at these concepts. After the war in Gaza, and if we have Palestinian unity, do you think there is a majority in Israel for a one-state solution with Hamas with 4,000 rockets in the basement? Not at all. That is the new reality that has to do with how we look at the paradigms and how we discuss them. We need to have that discussion based on realities and not on concepts. And I'm living here in the world of realities, and I can assure you one thing, that is clearly defining the way people are looking at this and how they see or how they look at options for getting out of the current situation. So that's where we are. The bigger change for the people in Gaza is not to start the two-state solution negotiations, but to open Gaza. That's also a reality, and that I know. Okay, is that an answer?
Yeah. Zaid, are you satisfied?
Kind of. Thank you.
So unfortunately, time is running. Allow me to read 2 or 3 questions from the public, and Ambassador, then the floor will be yours. What type of multi-track activities would be more helpful now? Can you share some example? Do you see any role, another question, do you see any role at all for the international community, for instance, the European Union, trying to balance the asymmetry of power between the parties? And if yes, how could that be done? Last, many questions, unfortunately I have to choose. Do you think that what is going on in the West Bank is apartheid from the Israeli to the Palestinians? Ambassador.
Can you repeat the last question, please?
If you think or believe that what is going on in the West Bank by the Israeli to the Palestinians is a sort of apartheid, like in South Africa before Madiba Mandela?
Okay. Let me go to the A word and start with that one. Listen, I do not find this kind of notions any productive whatsoever. I am not in the business of conceptualizing what's going on at the West Bank. I'm in the business of trying to do something with it. I fully accept that people do have this kind of discussions and the right of people to have their opinion on it. But that kind of approach is not something I will be running down the street promoting myself. I leave that for others. When it comes to how the international community can leverage the imbalance of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, that is a very pertinent question. And I give you a kind of example as how we have tried to leverage it, but not succeeded. I was a part of an initiative that came to its peak in 2011, 2012, where we were building up institutions for running a Palestinian state. And that was done with a very serious effort between the PA that designed the whole thing, took the initiatives to it, and was backed by the international community. That was a leveraging of the difference, but not a removal of the occupation. But it gave a totally different platform for the Palestinians, to look after their own affairs and deal with the Israelis in a different and more serious way than they could do with weak institutions. I will not, I just take note of the fact that this doesn't work the same way. But we missed a massive opportunity. And I think the Israelis, and this is not based on analysis, this is based on a long series of meetings with Israeli officials. I think there is a realization that that opportunity was missed and disregarded in a way that shouldn't have been done. It was a mistake on the Israeli side not to use that opportunity. And we have had a reset or a kind of reverse of the developments after. Sorry. The approach by the international community is actually to leverage the asymmetry. The EU has been doing a lot of building up that institutional capacity. The donors have been doing a lot, not only with a huge amount of money, but with smart money to do the same kind of leveraging. The question is, can we leverage the political process so it is not becoming asymmetric? That is way more difficult because we cannot sit on the parties and force them to take position that they consider not to be in their national interest, whether that is the Israelis or that is the Palestinians. And it occurs on both sides. So to squeeze a compromise into place with the two sides we have as they are, I do not think is possible. That was the first question. Can you repeat that again?
The first question was, was about what type of multi-track activities would be more helpful now?
Yeah, what I said when I lined up the points that I needed to address up until October, that is a multi-track. I can tell you, I mean, if we start involving in that, that is really a multi-track. And there will have to be, the parties will need to be involved broadly, the factions need to be involved broadly, and the international community will have to be involved broadly. And this is, what I'm saying to you now, is actually something we actively are discussing on how to move forward along different lines, addressing different issues along timelines. And when it comes to kind of the content and how we do stuff. And it's a very proactive involvement from the international community, including the Quartet, that is meeting regularly and are discussing these issues. The Quartet is not, it is not a group that is sitting producing press statements, but we are actually trying to kind of leverage some strategies that can carry forward and stick to an extent that we can lift us into a different, hopefully better reality down the road.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador, to answer to our uncomfortable questions. Thank you to Randa and thank you to Zaid for your focused and provocative, I would say, questions and very very interesting questions, engaging questions. Unfortunately, time is running, is over. It's not running out. It's over. So I thank you all very much, and I hope we will have the opportunity, the reason to talk again about this strange, long time, bi-century war conflict between Israeli and Palestinians. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, and the questions were not particularly difficult. The reality is worse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.